Hi, everyone. We'd like to thank you for joining us and welcome to the Common Table. My name is Natanya Escate, and thank you for joining our conversation for the people, for the planet, and for the common grain. This is Antoinette. She is a United Nations Environmental Program Goodwill Ambassador, a founder of two amazing organizations that really focus on communities in the Philippines, indigenous peoples, and really addressing the climate crisis here in our country. So we're going to have a great conversation about leadership, intersectionality, and just being an advocate for the better in our country.
For you to be able to recognize that at such a young age is actually really beautiful to see and to witness. I feel like we're seeing that all across the world right now, the youth really taking a stand and not just speaking about it, but taking the lead, actually leadership roles and things that you were doing as well. And it's really inspiring because even at my age, when I was your age, there you go, I feel like I wasn't really delving into these topics the way that you are today. We all do what we can in our own way. I feel we all strive for that. We all make that effort. But at the same time, at the end of the day, we know that today, the world we live in, the needs have just escalated in every single way, from humanitarian needs to climate change, which I know intersectionality is something that is also very valuable to you and that you recognize. And for those that are listening, intersectionality really means that connection of people and planet. That when we talk about environmental initiatives or initiatives for people or for communities, it's not necessarily that we take separately anymore or that we consider as something that is one or the other, because whatever happens to the environment affects people. At the end of the day, that is actually why we are caring for the environment and taking steps to try to fight climate change or build a better world that is more sustainable or that thrives on a circular economy, to really actually help life thrive, not just so that we can survive. And one wonderful thing that you mentioned to begin with was Indigenous communities as well. And it's really just so beautiful once again to see how you recognize their role on a global scale, not just caring and supporting them as Indigenous groups that have so much to share in terms of knowledge and culture, but also really seeing them as caretakers of nature, of biodiversity, of our precious planet. The Indigenous peoples represent 5% of the world, but they are actually responsible for protecting 80% of the planet's biodiversity. So really seeing their value and the role that they play in protecting nature, but not just protecting nature, protecting all of us. And I know that one of the things that you were asking about was how can we really support them more? And I hope that today we can actually delve into more of those conversations and how there are really different ways to empower and support Indigenous communities in terms of course, not just supporting their knowledge, but also livelihood and including them in conversations.
Actually, the name for the common good, for the common green, and the name for the very podcast, which is the Common Table, actually came from a platform called Earthrise. I don't know if you know them, and they have this entire series about Indigenous communities, and they said that these communities, though there's so little of them left on the planet, they're responsible for 80%, taking care and nurturing planet Earth. And so Earthrise's little slogan for it was, so why aren't we giving them a seat at the table? And I was like, what? Yeah, right. So we're having all these conversations, right? Where we're talking about the planet and how to fix them and who to prioritize. But these are the people that actually might know so much more than us, definitely would know so much more wisdom and knowledge and have great experience firsthand about how to take care, respect, and also just interact with nature. We don't particularly have to leave it as it is, right? We can communicate with the earth and receive from it and give back to it. And to really understand these communities, because there's so many of them in a sense, and they're not all the same. And in our country alone, right, like we've mentioned before the recording, we've got these great communities in the Philippines that are not given the spotlight, are not being brought into the table. definitely.
Yes,
Yeah.
honestly, there are so many issues, and when we speak of Indigenous communities, I feel like with them, a lot of these issues actually intersect and layer. There and it's sad, from not giving them a voice or seat at the table when it comes to decision making, a role to play in solutions when they actually are the ones already implementing them, whether we know it or not, or whether we support it or not. They are there as caretakers of nature. A lot of our forest rangers are actually the ones that are caretakers of nature and are on the front lines, risking their very lives. So one specific issue that we can spotlight is one that is fought for by a global organization called Global Witness. And they really speak about what is happening to Indigenous communities across the world. But in the Philippines, sadly, at one point, we even ranked number one when it came to the most dangerous countries in the world for land and environmental defenders. And this means that lives are actually taken. And this is studied and done according to number of deaths. But when we talk about it, of that, it's so sad to think of it in numbers, because these are people, these are lives that are at stake. And a lot of them are Indigenous communities, Indigenous leaders that are on the forefront of really trying to protect these spaces, forests, protected areas that are being encroached upon a lot of times by development, by private sector groups, by mining, by dirty energy. And these happen not just, of course, in mountains and forests, but also in coastal areas as well. It's happening everywhere. And once again, we highlight the fact that it's not just about looking at how the environment is being depleted or mountains are being cleared of trees. It's about lives being lost, and precious lives of people that are actually dedicating everything that they are, their whole entire being, including their families' lives, into protecting nature and protecting the planet, so that human beings across the world, not just in our country, can thrive and can continue on. And once again, when we look at the numbers in the Philippines, we really are one of the ones most at risk and one of the most impacted by these issues. Another thing that we really want to look at is supporting them. So when we look at economic empowerment, a lot of times it comes maybe in the form of donations, which is, of course, really wonderful, because this can be provided for infrastructure or anything else that they might need, from renewable energy to clean water, to support for their schools and education. But when we look at the support that they need, it's really a long-term infrastructure and investments, so that they can actually be the ones that do the implementation on the ground. And, when it comes to supporting them, it's not really just about going in there and bringing in what we think they need. It's actually really important, first and foremost, to listen to them, to listen to what they believe in, to listen to what they think is also best, or what their knowledge can bring to the table, what their expertise can bring to the table. So whether it's Indigenous communities or local communities, more than anything, to support them is to listen first, to really do things by the book, having what they call FPIC, which is free and prior informed consent. So really listening once again and opening up the conversation, not just giving and delivering either.
Right. I think for me, it clearly sounds quite crucial, and it's definitely, when we talk about having a conversation in the table to talk about what to do with our resources and with our planet, it seems like a no-brainer. But I don't know about you, I mean, you've definitely had a lot more interaction and a lot more access in a sense. But for me, I'm this university student abroad, not even in the Philippines, but as a Filipino, it seems like a matter that definitely touches my heart. And I feel like there's thousands of people like me, thousands of youth like me, that because of the power of social media, we're able to hear about it, but we're not particularly able to help in a way that seems enough. So maybe what do you think, like, for someone like me, like, what could I do? Am I really limited to just a donation box? Is there anything else I could do that would help Indigenous communities in the Philippines?
Oh my. Honestly, that's a very good question, Anya, because I feel that a lot of times we all feel limited in our capacity to help. Even our nonprofit CORA, when it began, it almost felt intimidating to think that how could we start a nonprofit? What we don't know the first thing about this, but in reality, it comes from helping. It comes from really connecting people, working together, listening, and finding the best pathways forward that make sense both for the environment and humanity. And when you think about it in that way, you really see that everyone has that special power and capacity to contribute. I'd like to give you a couple of stories right now from the background of youth, such as yourself, and using the power of media as well. Really seeing that no matter what, we all have a window to the world, first and foremost, through our social media platforms. And as much as we are definitely trying to learn how to use this and manage it in a better way so that it's not as toxic as it can be, because of course, we really truly believe social media needs to be managed properly. It can also be used as such a powerful force for good if managed in the right way. So that in itself, sharing stories, what you are doing today, what we are doing today, having this conversation, this is already extremely powerful because you are using your network from the people that you may know or not know, but at the same time, people that you are meeting through this podcast in itself. And that already cascades upon them as well and their role in sharing the conversations and the things that they hear and that they learn every day in a positive light. So one story would be from a youth leader named Gab Mejia. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He is a National Geographic Young Explorer. Um, oh my gosh, I'm not sure how old he is now. I've known him for a few years now, but I believe he's around 24, 25, 26 years old. Gab, I apologize, but he's quite young, especially when he began, and his passion really was always in photography. But now he's been able to use photography as a way to tell stories, as a way to share the beauty of the Philippines, but at the same time sharing the stories of the truths behind the beauty that we see and that we are not aware about. So he takes photos. One specific location is of the Agusan Marsh, and this is in the Mindanao area. So the Agusan marshlands are actually one of the largest wetlands in the Philippines, and it is actually protected by indigenous groups that Gab himself has directly communicated with and has met through his initiatives and his projects through storytelling. And this is something that he has shared with the world through global platforms to really share what needs to be done and also the issues that are there plaguing these communities. And one of them is the threat of palm oil plantations. So a lot of times we are not aware that the ingredients in our products are actually very harmful for the earth, but we've gotten used to accepting and purchasing and using things that are, I guess, on shelves because we assume that if they're being advertised, if they're in stores, then automatically how could they be bad? But nowadays we see that there is so much responsibility on us as consumers to do our part and to do this research. Now, palm oil is actually really destructive because in order to grow it, they have to either clear rainforests or even marshlands and wetlands, such as the Agusan Marsh here in the Philippines. And to grow these trees so that they can harvest it for this ingredient that is mass produced in everything from cosmetic products to food products. Now, palm oil in itself, we don't think it's bad, but it's because of how it's grown and how it's harvested. Now, sadly, a lot of indigenous communities, their lives are actually on the line. There have been deaths and threats in these communities to the indigenous leaders and to the indigenous groups that are helping protect these areas from these particular groups. And Gab himself, just by taking these photos, just by sharing these stories on platforms such as National Geographic and so much more, he's actually even received threats himself as a youth leader, as someone doing storytelling and using his passion to tell stories that need to be heard. And it really shocked me when he shared this with me, because when you really think about it, he is someone that is also on the front lines of this and directly impacted as well. Another story would be the Masungi Geo Reserve. I'm not quite sure if you're familiar with that area that is located here in the Rizal area of the Philippines.
Yes.
So it is
I've seen it because it's become this like tourist place, and it's beautiful. And I know that it's protected, right?
Yes.
It is a protected area.
Yes, it is. It's actually a protected area that is still being threatened. So it makes you wonder sometimes,
Oh,
you know,
wow.
what will it really take to get help to make all these issues go away or to stop them from happening or escalating even further. The sisters that are actually helping lead the initiatives for Masungi Geo Reserve are also youth, such as yourself. They're in their 20s as well. And they actually began, I believe, in their late teens and in their early 20s. And they're also female. So girl power to that as well. Sisters Anne and Billy Dumaliang. And it's sad to think that they spent most of their holidays once again at a police precinct because of threats that were made upon their forest rangers, who even had to spend a week unfairly because of people that were actually also invading the space where they're not even supposed to be, because it is a protected area. So once again, showing that it can happen in areas such as the Agusan marshlands, which are far away and hard to reach, but they're also happening right here in our very backyard, in Rizal, accessible to all of us, a tourist spot, an ecotourism spot that families even visit. So just sad stories, but a reality that at the same time, once again, your role in telling these stories and cascading the impacts, cascading these effects can help bring attention and shed light on what's actually happening as well.
Right. Do you reckon that it's a kind of climate denial? Like, do you think that like generally speaking, as a community, as Filipinos, that we have a sense of a climate denial, or do you think that we do sort of see what's happening, this reality that we speak of, and that we just feel like we're out of touch with it, that we really can't do much to address it? Or, you know, the mindset of it is what it is, right? Like, I mean, what can I do? Or do you think that it's a kind of denial that, oh no, it's not as bad as it looks? Because I'm not really sure as a community how we're looking at it generally. Because we hear about it, right? Like, we hear about horrible things happening. We know, I mean, like with what happened in Siargao and Cebu, like we know that these things are happening more and more, and we know that it's devastating. You know, we might know friends of friends or even families that, you know, are experiencing the attack of climate change. And so I'm not really sure why we're not standing up on our feet, you know, kind of screaming it out loud. What do you think it could be that prevents us as a community?
That's a really, really, really good point that you've made, Enya. And I do have a few replies to that I feel may be some of the main reasons why. And, you know, this is just my personal opinion from my experience and my own personal journey as well through this mission. But first, I would say it would have to be possibly the information barrier. Next would be access. And then third would be, honestly, maybe feeling overwhelmed, not really knowing where to begin. And so going into these thoughts, I would like to say first, information. Shockingly, depending on the posts that I've put out, maybe because hopefully of my perspective as someone in the media, as someone that is also in entertainment, I see the difference in how people react to posts. Like if you're doing maybe a leisure post, a product post, just a selfie random post even, you know, and then the difference of how people react and respond to a serious topic like a humanitarian issue, hunger, people in need, something environmental, maybe even climate change. It's really sad, but if there was like a study done, like if I even just did a social experiment on my own personal social media, it's really sad that the serious issues that we care about, that we're discussing today, that people that are listening care about, are not really something that people respond to as much. You don't get as many likes, you don't get as many comments and shares. Although I do have to say I appreciate those that do it, because I have seen the rise in the people that do that as well. There were less before. There are more of them now. You're one of those champions, Enya. But at the same time, you do see that contrast. So that also leads me to the fact that the topic isn't shared enough. Now, sadly, I feel like it's not discussed enough in media. It's not discussed enough in entertainment, in film. There's an initiative that Break Free from Plastic is actually trying to do right now in Hollywood. They're trying to bring the whole single-use plastics and circular economy topic to Hollywood to see that how it can be embedded into scripts, into stories, and into films, how that can actually impact the subconscious of humanity to make better choices. Imagine that, watching a random sitcom or series and seeing your favorite character say, "Oh, I don't need a straw." Imagine. So it's kind of like something that I feel people could actually catch on to. So things like that, we really can't underestimate the power of media. And I feel that, the youth can contribute simply by asking for it, by supporting initiatives that call out for it, by sharing it, and even by commenting directly on media platforms, because they pay attention to what people say on social media. They pay attention to comments. So, rather than just even giving comments on saying how wonderful the episode was or how awful the episode was, they do respond to comments about, "Hey, why don't you guys talk about climate change more in your episode? We'd love to see more of that," or, embedding it into your script or into the topics that you talk about. So knowledge, media, information, and sadly, weirdly enough, I have no idea if it's algorithm, that there's this conversation about the conspiracy of algorithms. And wow,
goodness,
I've seen so many popular vloggers, bloggers, influencers discuss how come when I talk about social issues, how come when I talk about certain specific social justice topics or even climate justice topics, all of a sudden it feels like I get blocked or it gets called out or it gets flagged. And I've seen it even happen in my own posts when I put specific topics about social justice issues that we truly care about. So you kind of just wonder what is going on. And, these are things that we've tried to address. It's still happening. But, once again, let's try to discuss it more as much as we can and hopefully see a solution or a resolution, because we know that the power of collective action, of collective voices really makes a difference. Access. I guess people sometimes don't feel that they have the access to help to really directly make an impact. But once again, I feel that, COVID-19, the pandemic, has set us apart, but at the same time has created pathways so that we can connect more. And I feel that even when it comes to the solutions, a lot of groups across the world have created platforms so that we can get involved more. And once again, it begins with online sharing, and then people really creating ways to be involved in knowledge sharing, like webinars. And then more than that, really being able to volunteer some way, somehow. Our nonprofit CORA also creates platforms for that together with different networks. And we hope that, through visiting our page, you can also find ways not just to donate, but to empower yourselves more. Even what's happening with us today, I feel like was born from, those connections through first the academe, through school, through knowledge empowerment, through collective action, through social media, the power of coming together online like we are today. And then from there, I'd actually like to move on to beyond access to overwhelming feelings. I feel like, not knowing where to begin. Oh my goodness. For me, I feel that way most of the time. Like, where do we even begin? And I feel that it's best to really zero in on what you feel your heart seems to latch onto the most. So if there are things that I feel emotionally impact you, do not underestimate the power of that, because once again, it always begins and ends with our hearts. And I don't mean to get cheesy, but that's what drives and fuels everything across the world. Love. At the end of the day, love can solve every single problem. If we loved all of creation, whether it's plants, animals, and at the end of the day, loving each other. So really looking at the fact that we should zero in on the things that impact our hearts, and then looking to beginning in our own personal community, whether it's our family, our friends, our schools, or if we look to the online community of nonprofit organizations and groups that actually can bring us together towards like-minded communities and individuals. I have to say, a lot of the people that are close to me today, I've met through this journey, and a lot of the bonds have grown stronger, even from my past friendships, because of these missions. So it can only spread more love, spread more camaraderie. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm using a term that I used to use, that used to be used when I was young. But, spread more love and light across all platforms and in different ways. So starting in your heart and starting in your community. And if it has to be even an online community, that is powerful in itself.
Right. Thank you for that. Thank you. And I wanted to kind of go back to what you were saying about information, like, information that we have and that we find and how much access we have to them. And I've noticed something particularly about our community, and even with my family, we get a lot of our information on our gadgets. The Philippines is one of the leading countries in just simply being online and internet use. So the amount, we spend a lot of time on our gadgets, a lot of time on Facebook in particular, actually. And it's kind of similar to what you mentioned about the impact of movies or Hollywood. We don't notice it. And this might be a bit sidetracked, but I definitely can understand why they would want to bring in certain topics into, embedded into movies, and then have, this coming generation get exposed to it. Because the things that I watched growing up have, subconsciously affected the way I view my future. I want things to look a particular way. I want to be exposed and look and feel and experience certain things, because that's what I watched in movies, and I would connect them to what I deserve in my reality. So if we think that, the whole idea of women empowerment, for example, we certainly see that rising in movies the last 2 decades. And so if we have that kind of celebration and respect embedded in movies, I wouldn't be too shocked, but I would be certainly very glad to see that same effect happen to coming generations, or even mine, as I watch more movies. So I think that's really interesting that they're starting to bring that up in Hollywood. Another thing, I think, when you mentioned overwhelmed, we do have all this upcoming information, and we get bombarded by them on social media, despite having weird algorithms or weird situations happening. We can't deny that they exist, and there's more and more of these topics being brought up. One thing that I noticed in particular is perhaps a generational thing between my parents, at least, or I have a few friends that are into sustainability, or at least in the conversation. And when we think about, how is this conversation happening at home? Some of our family or older relatives may be like, well, it worked out for us 30 years ago. It worked out for us 50 years ago, and they don't realize that actually the conversation of climate change has existed for a very long time, for decades, right? And so we notice the weird shock and the disparity with former Vice President Al Gore, right? Like, he's been talking about climate change, and everyone's like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? What is this? This is not the most important thing to talk about. Like, sure, it's just weather. It's just,
yes.
And then, so, it has been a conversation, and it has certainly been a kind of concept for a very long time. But I think particularly, my generation has been so much more awakened by it, because we know that this is going to be felt. Like, I know I'm going to feel it way more than my parents or my grandparents. And so for them, they're like, cool, this is a thing. We can see it. These are some numbers. These are some things that are happening with the Arctic. But, we don't realize that the world is changing drastically, right? Like, just recently they've announced, academia has announced that we are in the Anthropocene era, which means that we're not in the Holocene anymore. We've been in the Holocene period for a very long time. And that's where we were, our planet has been in the plus minus 1%. We've been there, and we've been we've been able to grow and advance because of climate being in a particular manner. But actually now we've stepped out of it. We've stepped out of it. And now in a way we're in control, which is quite ironic because we're still having to submit to, the wrath of nature. We're still having to submit to how climate change wants to come at the planet and our community. And so it's a different world that we're experiencing and we're going to dive into. And so I think most certainly, I think your third point about being overwhelmed is very much valid. I mean, whether you're not reading at all or you are, watching a million documentaries a week, you can't help but feel a sense of overwhelmed, and it's quite numbing sometimes, and figuring out, like, oh, what am I supposed to do, and how am I supposed to address that? It can get incredibly overwhelming for anyone. Yeah, most certainly.
Wow. And yeah, honestly, so much wisdom at such a young age.
No.
I hope that whoever's listening right now will get inspired by the passion that you were showing, because I'd like to go across a few things that you mentioned. So really beginning with the first thing that you mentioned, which is before Hollywood. What did you say again before that? How media is getting connected?
Right. Like I mentioned how in the Philippines, like we're
there you
always
go.
just, yeah.
Across the world, you are correct with that information. We are actually known, I'm not sure with the particular specific numbers, but we are known to be one of the most media savvy countries. We love social media. We love being online. We participate, we engage. We are very passionate about it. So, seeing the power that lies in that as well. But looking as well at media, the power of media. I mean, when you look at Leonardo DiCaprio and his influence, just that in itself, when you look at Emma Watson and the role that she plays in influencing young women when it comes to women empowerment across the world and gender equality. But then also looking to what you just mentioned about the intergenerational gaps or the intergenerational disparities, or maybe not even just that, maybe the beautiful connections that we can also look at with these intergenerational relationships. I turned 40 last year. And when I was young, growing up, sustainability wasn't something that was a big conversation at home. We were taught about, of course, charity, love, and helping and giving, but it wasn't discussed the way it's discussed today. So in reality, a lot of the things that you and I are talking about, I learned in this decade, in this last decade of my life, and some in the last few years. And you yourself, really looking at how a lot of it you probably learned from school, but a lot of it you also probably picked up by doing your verified research online, your responsible research, looking at verified sources, making sure it's not fake news, but, empowering yourself in that way. And not just that, looking at how we can also empower each other at home. So seeing how either our parents who might have knowledge of how things used to be sustainable back in the day. There was a time that plastic didn't exist. I even remember in my childhood, there was the milkman method of delivering milk. And this was in the province in Angeles City, Pampanga. So imagine if we were doing it back in my childhood where they would deliver glass bottles, take it back, refill it, and then redeliver again when you needed it. Why in the world couldn't we create these systems and make them thrive again? Circular economy systems that aren't actually brand new. They've actually existed, but somehow kind of got off track because of profit or seeming convenience, quote unquote convenience, but that actually is an inconvenience to the environment and to all of us and to biodiversity, to nature, to human health. So seeing how at home it can really begin there as well. And also looking at the inspiration that children bring. A lot of the communities that we've worked with, that we've visited, that we've collaborated with, oh my, it started at schools by the youth. There's a particular school, St. Mary's of Baliwag, Bulacan. They've actually started plastic-free initiatives where everything is diverted to junk shops, recyclers, and they were able to collect enough funds to help support the scholarship funds of kids in need and children in need in their community. So these are things that are incredibly amazing, that are actually led by children, led by the youth, and that show how sustainability and circular economy can be done in a local sphere, and it can even be led not just by youth but by children as well. So seeing how you were doing that as well, Enya, in your own way, in your incredible way, with your platform as well.
Oh, thank you. No, I think it's really interesting how you mentioned how it was like back then. I've always thought it was really interesting. It reminded me of how my dad used to tell us. So my dad's all the way from Iloilo, and but he's been here for the last 30 years. But that's where he grew up, and he grew up right next to the water. And I'll never forget. I was kind of. I thought I was being a hero in the home this one time, and I was like, I don't want to eat fish because it's like mass produced, and it's it's taken in massive ways, and it's exploitive of nature, and we don't let these fish grow. And I was going nuts about it, and so I was like, so I'm not going to eat fish ever again, and he explained to me how back then they would spend half their day fishing for what was going to be on the table later on that night. And what he was trying to tell me was, it's not the fish particularly that's your enemy, right? It's not particularly nature that's the problem. It's really how we take that, and I think I've never been exposed to that. I've never been exposed to, a milkman coming to my door, like on the 10th floor of my building doing that. It's, here in Macau and in a lot of cities, we've noticed that a big issue is really that ability to export these items. We're in the middle of these metropolitan areas. I've never seen a farm like in this area. Like, I've only seen farms when I would travel to them. We don't, all of our seafood and all of our meat are exported, are mass produced, are farmed even. And so I think maybe that it's quite bittersweet that here in cities, we get exposed to all these great information, and yet what we're exposed to in terms of what we can access and eat directly is actually quite limited. We have all these options, and like you said, we think it's like for convenience or something. But one thing that I was learning in one of my classes about green product life was actually when things are more convenient or much more cheaper or accessible, that's certainly not what it means. Just because something is cheaper doesn't mean that nobody's paying for it, right? Like, the planet has to pay for it, or the people that are not paid properly have to technically pay for that with their energy and with their craft. Because a lot of this food that we have access to, or clothing, for instance, that we have access to, even in the Philippines, it's clearly great quality, even though it's mass produced. Like, someone is at the cost, someone is at the end of that. And it's devastating, and we don't notice it. We're kind of really happy because it's on sale, or really happy that we get to buy a way cheaper version of the item, right? Yeah.
Yes.
It's really big in the Philippines.
No, it's actually so wonderful of you to share the story of you and your father as well, and of the local communities, the local fishing communities as well. Because when you really think about it, you mentioned the Anthropocene era, which is the one that we are in right now, which means that human beings are basically impacting everything in the world. And it's because of human behavior, climate change, everything that is happening, from pollution to biodiversity loss to climate change and a warming planet. Everything is leading back to Anthropocene reasons, or anthropogenic reasons, which is due to human beings. Now, when you mentioned fishing, it's really sad to think that sometimes it almost feels like it's all or nothing, that you can't eat meat, you can't eat fish, we're running out of resources. And when you really think about it, we don't want to have to tell the world, or we don't want the world to have to live with so much limitation, because in reality, there is enough for everyone if only we can actually produce things, manage things, distribute things, and allocate things sustainably in the right way. So it's really more of overconsumption and production in a way that is focused too much on maybe cutting costs so that profit margins can be larger. But because of that, it impacts the environment, it impacts communities, it impacts the industry itself. So industries that think that they are growing are actually harming their own capacity to keep going, to be sustainable, wherein they're depleting their own resources of the industry that they need to survive and to profit. So when you think of organizations like Oceana, they're actually focused on the sustainable management of the ocean and fisheries. So ensuring that we can help feed the world through the sustainable management of our oceans as well, because it is a large source of protein for planet Earth, not just for specific communities, but for planet Earth itself. So seeing how not just with that, but with agriculture, it can also be done. Also, really looking at how the world is becoming more overpopulated, and what you mentioned about, living in an urban setting, living in the city. When you really think about it, though, when you really look at it with how much we rely so much on delivery now and all these different systems that are accessible, especially to cities, you would think that refill systems, recycling systems would actually even be more accessible in these situations, because it is easier to deal with a whole entire building rather than try to go to houses that are located in far areas in provinces or in rural areas. So really looking at how these connections, if brands and companies and private sector groups could really embed it, they could even save money, because less packaging actually means savings as well. And of course, in the end, also means more profit. But really looking at people in the planet before profit. I had one last quick point that I actually wanted to say about that. Oh, there is a company in the States called Loop that is actually doing that. They are working with different global brands actually to deliver typical consumer products, toiletries, food products that we already use on a daily basis, so that it can actually be delivered in reusable, refillable containers. So someone actually comes and picks them up. So this goes from ice cream to deodorant, to shampoo, to lotion. So you can check it out. It's actually something that's working in the United States, but of course, we'd like to see these systems spread more across the world, and being able to be done in local communities as well.
Yeah, that reminded me, like in Europe, they have very similar concept where it's really bringing back the responsibility to the companies itself. Like, like for instance, like soft drink companies like Coke, in Europe, I know that some countries have embedded this law where you sell them and then you're also required to take them back, like the cans itself, because when we purchase something, it's we think that it's actually our full responsibility. Like, now what do we do with this? I've drank it from this plastic bottle, and then now I'm essentially responsible to throw it away. And it doesn't make sense to enjoy something for a few seconds and then the consequence of that, the earth would have to take responsibility for it for a very, very, very long time. And so to put them back, and then also, even when companies would give incentives when you return it back, ultimately they receive a lot more, they save a lot more from that as well. So it's
yes,
and it's so much more than just profit as well, right? Like it's really giving back the full responsibility. Like, you took it out and you formed it, and we just wanted the thing inside it. We don't want to have the responsibility. And in a way, we shouldn't be responsible for that, not entirely as well, right? Like, as consumers, as citizens of the planet, we do have a kind of need to be conscious. We have to be a bit more aware and mindful of our impact, but we're only so limited to the systems that we are in, right? We're only so limited to the laws and the rules that are, that we're trying to play within. And so, no, definitely, I thought it was interesting how you brought up, that we're, in a sense, sometimes we're still trying to prioritize, or we're trying to prioritize the people and the planet, or we're trying to prioritize profit. And I mean, I don't think it has to always be such an evil conversation, right? Like, that was one question that I wanted to have with you about the sustainable planet, right? Like your business, and I read it on your website. It's the sustainable planet. It really embodies the business for good, right? Like, you want to be able to have access and respect and admire and encourage as well as celebrate Indigenous communities in the Philippines. And so, and with that comes their great craft, right? Like I saw in one of your presentations, like with Ender, and they made these great crafts, and they had like these utensils and these like accessory type of items, and they're great, and we can hold them highly. And I wanted to know what you think about trying to balance profit as well as the planet. Like how do we make sense of it in a way that still makes sense to us, like people that we have to keep up with business in a way, but then also make sure that we're not doing it in an exploitive, disrespectful manner.
Oh, you are truly amazing, Enya. So I have a response for that, cascading down, starting with all the wonderful points that you mentioned earlier. So beginning with people and the planet before profit. Yes, you are correct. It's not supposed to be an evil conversation at all, because there are some incredible brands across the world doing their part. So, one of the best ways that we can actually help make a difference really is in being consumers. And when we speak of how usually the blame is always pointed on us consumers, that it's our fault or that the solutions have to all come from us, that is actually extremely wrong, because in reality, the solutions still have to come from the producers itself, because it starts with the production of these products. But then, of course, it gets delivered to us. So imagine if everything out there was bad. Ultimately, as consumers, what could we do? We don't even have a choice anymore. And there are locations where when things get there, when products are brought to them, they actually do not have a choice except for all unsustainable options. That happens a lot in the Philippines. On average, the numbers show that we use about 163 million sachets per day, and over 40
That's
million
devastating.
thin film bags, plastic bags, over 4 million diapers per day. So when you look at those numbers, you can't just say that people are to blame, because first and foremost, when you look at the impact on communities, at the end of the day, even when it comes to single-use plastics and things like this, the impact is on them as well, because these communities are the ones where the pollution comes back. It clogs their waterways. It clogs the floodgate, or the esteros and the rivers where water needs to flow, which causes flooding in their area as well. And not just that, of course, it pollutes the region, it pollutes the area, the water. Biodiversity is affected in many coastal communities, including fisheries. So when you look at that, the impacts are really cascading, and you can't just say that people are to blame, because at the same time too, when you look at people's economic status, people that are trying to survive and that have limited economic means cannot be blamed for products that are out there if that's all that's available. So we always look first and foremost to these companies that are providing these products to take the lead in creating the solutions, the circular economy systems and innovations that are needed so that things can be more sustainable, and so that communities, especially vulnerable and marginalized communities, can actually have access to these products. There's this thing where it almost felt like sustainability and zero waste items were becoming like a fad or even a luxury. And it really can't be that, because when you look at sustainability, it even goes back to indigenous knowledge, to simple ways of doing things, of being, brilliant, ingenuity, putting all these wonderful ways of saving and conserving and protecting without really thinking that it has to cost, or without having to think that we have to spend more. It should actually help us save more, as you mentioned as well. So once again, looking at the impact on communities first and foremost, looking at people and the planet before profit, but looking at how, when we do look at people and the planet first, when we look at the longevity of how this actually helps humanity thrive so that the earth will not be depleted, so that we can live healthier lives with clean air, clean water, clean environment, and clean communities and surroundings. This actually, if you think of it from people that might be looking at it from a business standpoint, that is more sustainable, because you can actually endure longer and make it grow longer and last longer. But you mentioned earlier climate deniers. Now that's when you do hit a barrier, because if it is something that they do not believe at all, and there are people that exist across the world that it's hard to believe, I'm even speechless, but they actually don't believe it. So, what do? We just keep moving forward with the ones that do believe, the ones that can make a difference, the ones that can make an impact, and do the best that we can, and keep moving forward and keep fighting peacefully through conversations and peaceful solutions, so that somehow the impact that we make can keep growing, and somehow we can convince them that this truly is the pathway forward, that this truly also, looking at it from a business standpoint, is the more sustainable pathway forward as well.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, no, definitely. It's such a holistic situation, right? Like it's really complex. It's not just weather. It's not just food. It's not even agriculture only. It's not just it's not just fashion. It's not just groceries. It's such a massive topic, and it's got so many layers and different facets. And I think, if anything, that's what makes it, even though it's such a huge topic to go and try and tackle as an individual, in a way that's actually a great way to look at it, because if there's so many things to have to fix and address, then I could find my own specialty, and one that I can actually dive into, rather than trying to take it all up on my shoulders, right? No, certainly, no, definitely.
Yes.
So, yeah, your own gifts and your own specialties, and in your own way, right? Like,
yes,
find your own.
I think that's what the global goals is all about. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because when you talk about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them. And, you don't necessarily think that you're supposed to solve every single one or pinpoint every single one. When you really look at it, they're all interconnected. But once again, start with your heart, what touches you closely. And then at the same time, use your gifts, your powers and capacities to carry it forward, like you are, Enya. Your wonderful communication skills, your brilliance, the beauty that you really shine both in and out, And those are the things that I feel that really create and make a change. I always like to use the fingerprint example by reminding everybody that you are the only one in the world that has that fingerprint. No one else has that fingerprint, or your fingerprint. And even identical twins are not completely identical. So when you look at it that way, you were created and born to be so unique, special in your own way, just in your physical form, in your teeny tiny fingertips. So when you really think about how miracles truly exist and how profound things can truly be, there are so much more, and there's so much more to unleash inside of you. Those gifts, those powers that are definitely unique, that only you can share, that only you can actually execute for people in the planet and for the world, like you are doing yourself. So I hope that everyone can remember that everyone in their own way, and it starts with your own gifts, whether it even be talkativeness like mine, as you can see with my long answers and replies.
No, I definitely agree. Now, that's something that actually, like, I've learned to embrace, right? Like, we can, even in our talkativeness, like, it's something that we can learn to be mindful about and use it for the better, right? So I think that's a great way. That's a great spot to end it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the talkativeness. It was great. It was such a fun first episode to have with you. I really enjoyed it. It was so insightful. It was such a privilege to hear your answers, and it's so great. Thank you so much for joining me on this first episode.
Oh my, and yeah, I think the pleasure, the honor is mine. I'm grateful to you that at such a young age, you're choosing to take this path. And I'm inspired by you. Thank you for this gift. And I hope that to everyone listening out there, that you'll be inspired to know that even right now, the fact that you were listening is not an accident. It's always meant to be. Always look at all the signs around you, to be able to make a difference, because they're always there. Anyone in need, whether it's someone that needs you to just listen to maybe a difficult day that they've been having, or a difficult week, or difficult past couple of years, that is already changing the world. So change is all around us, and you always have the power to make that difference. So thank you, Enya, and thank you to everyone out there that's doing their part in their own way. Thank you for changing the world.